Warm greetings to all of you tuning into podcast. Today's story. My ex-husband hijacked our $40 million diamond and fine jewelry company, then had the audacity to invite me to his grand rebranding gala as a guest of honor. My father just scoffed. "Go," he said. "There's going to be a hell of a show for you to watch." That night, while the unsigned divorce settlement was still sitting in my leather tote, my phone screen lit up with a sleek, digital invitation. My soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian Thorne, had just stripped me of my own $40 million diamond company, yet he arrogantly invited me to the launch party of his new brand. The words guest of honor stared back at me like a slap to the face. I had just been erased from the company registry, treated like a pariah by my in-laws, and yet he still wanted me sitting in the front row, smiling and clapping for his victory. Before I could even break down, my father, Arthur Sterling, simply glanced at the digital invite, let out a dry scoff and said, "Go. There's going to be a hell of a show for you to watch." When he said that, my hands were still trembling. Our old Victorian house in Boston's historic district was eerily quiet that evening. Outside, the distant sound of a snowplow scraped against the asphalt through the freezing sleet. I sat at the heavy oak dining table, still wearing the tailored suit I had worn to the lawyer's office. My eyes burned, but I couldn't cry. Sometimes, when humiliation hits you so suddenly, the tears just get stuck in your throat. Julian and I had gone over the divorce papers that very morning. At the mediator's office, he wore a bespoke navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his face as calm as if he were signing a real estate contract, not ending an 11-year marriage. He even asked me, his voice feather-light, "Did you read it thoroughly? If there's nothing else, just sign it, Clara. Let's keep this civilized." That word civilized sounded so sophisticated, yet it hurt so deeply. Civilized was when he quietly removed my executive powers from Sterling and Stone Diamonds. Civilized was when my name vanished from the internal directory. Civilized was when the man who used to call me his soulmate now just wanted me to take a small buyout and quietly walk away from a $40 million enterprise. I looked up at him. "Julian, half my life is in this company. What do you mean if there's nothing else?" He avoided my gaze, adjusting the luxury watch on his wrist. Back then, I used to think a woman could endure any hardship as long as her husband appreciated her sacrifices. Julian exhaled. "Clara, you're tired. You're just not cut out for the corporate battlefield anymore. Keep a few pieces for sentimental value. Let me handle the rest." I gave a hollow laugh. "The rest? You mean the company? The brand? The design patents? And the collection my mother left me?" He remained silent. That silence sent a chill down my spine. Just then, Eleanor Thorne, my mother-in-law, walked into the room. Wearing a plum silk blouse and carrying a Birkin bag, her voice wasn't loud, but every word sliced like a scalpel. "What more do you want, Clara? You couldn't provide an heir, you couldn't keep your husband happy, and now you want to hoard the company? The business is in my son's name. Don't make this difficult for him." For 11 years, I called that woman Mom. I bought her expensive supplements, organized their family Thanksgiving dinners, and stood on my feet cooking holiday roasts until my back ached. Yet, in her eyes, I was never family. I was just the barren woman who happened to be holding on to something her son wanted. I waited for Julian to say something. Just one word in my defense would have been enough. But he just looked down at his phone. At that moment, I realized I was no longer his wife, even before a judge slammed the gavel. I signed the line agreeing to the dissolution of marriage, the pen feeling weightless, though my chest felt like it was being crushed by a boulder. I signed for the divorce, but I absolutely did not sign the transfer of my shares. I did not sign away my mother's gemstone collection. I certainly did not sign any document allowing Julian to move my personal assets into his new corporate entity. I didn't know exactly what he had done behind my back yet, but my instincts told me to hold the final line. Leaving the building, Julian didn't walk me out. He just said, "Go home and rest. If you want to grab your personal things from the showroom in a few days, let management know in advance." He spoke as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired, not the woman who had stayed up countless nights with him assembling glass display cases, sketching ring settings, and building our very first client list. I caught a cab back to my father's house. Through the window, the early spring sleet of 2025 washed over Boston. As the car passed by Washington Street, the historic jewelry district, the glowing storefronts made me reminisce about my early days with Julian. He was poor then, but ambitious. I was a quiet, meticulous jewelry designer who only knew how to bury her face under a magnifying lamp. Sterling and stone diamonds was born from those days. I brought the craftsmanship, the capital, and the 13 Dawns a priceless collection of gems my mother left me. Julian brought his silver tongue, his street smarts, and his networking skills. I used to think a marriage was like a pair of hands washing each other, never expecting that one day, one hand would use the other to steal everything of value. By late afternoon, I arrived at my dad's house. Arthur Sterling was sitting at his mahogany desk, cleaning an old jeweler's loop. Seeing me walk in, he didn't ask much. He just poured me a mug of hot Earl Grey tea. "Is it done, sweetheart?" I nodded. "Yes, Dad. It's done." He looked at me for a long time. His eyes held no pity, nor any blame. It was the look of a man who had weathered many storms, knowing that if you catch someone too quickly when they fall, they'll never learn to stand back up. I was about to tell him everything when my phone vibrated. A text from Julian. "Clara, this Saturday, I'm launching Thorn Luxury Estate Diamonds at the Harbor Hotel in the Seaport District. I really want you there. If you show up, people will see we've had a civilized split." Reading that, my throat tightened. What did it mean to be a partner? Was it being the one who stood behind the spotlight, inspecting every single diamond? Or was it someone who was now relegated to the past, neatly packaged as a footnote in a glossy catalog? I tapped on the digital invite. On a black background with gold trim, the words gleamed arrogantly. The launch of Thorn Luxury Estate Diamonds. The next era of a $40 million diamond empire. Below, my name was listed under guests of honor. I handed the phone to my dad. "Look at this. He wants me there." Dad put on his reading glasses, sliding them down the bridge of his nose as he read every word. After a moment, he chuckled. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, freezing scoff like a master jeweler spotting a cubic zirconia sitting in a velvet box. "Go. There's going to be a hell of a show for you to watch." I froze. "You know something, don't you?" He set the phone down and slowly capped his loop case. "I don't know everything. But I do know that real gold doesn't fear the fire. And a thief who flaunts stolen goods in broad daylight will eventually choose the wrong stage." I looked at my father, my heartbeat quickening. For the first time all day, the humiliation inside me wasn't just pain, it was morphing into something else. Something colder. Sharper. I had been pushed out of my marriage, belittled by my in-laws, and erased from my company. But if Julian Thorn thought I was going to show up just to be a prop for his coronation, he was dead wrong. I wouldn't go to congratulate him, and I wouldn't go to cry. I would go to see with my own eyes how many spotlights, white roses, and eloquent speeches it takes to hide a fake stone. That night, after my dad mentioned a show, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom, listening to the sleet hitting the window pane. The house was dead quiet, save for the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away. Every time I closed my eyes, Julian's black and gold invitation flashed in my mind. A $40 million diamond empire. He wrote it as if the empire had sprouted from the ground beneath his feet, while I was just a nostalgic name added to the guest list for optics. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The warm light spilled over a framed photograph of my mother, Evelyn Sterling. She had a gentle smile. When she was alive, she wasn't a woman of many words. She worked as a master gemologist with my grandfather, her hands always carrying the faint scent of polishing compound and mineral oil. She used to tell me, "Clara, gold can be weighed, and gems can be measured, but human character takes a long time to accurately appraise. When she passed away, I was 22. After her memorial, my father called me into his study. On his desk sat an antique mahogany lockbox. It wasn't large, but seeing it made my chest tighten. It was the box she always kept on the highest shelf. Dad unlocked it. Inside were 13 deep blue velvet slots, each holding a precious gemstone. Under the desk lamp, they glowed quietly deep, cold, and flawless, like dewdrops that refused to evaporate in the morning sun. Dad spoke slowly. "Your mother named this collection the 13 Dawns. She made me promise to pass it down to you." I choked up. "I don't know how to look after these, Dad." "This is her life's work." He looked at me, his eyes strict but entirely loving. "Because it is her life's work, it must go to someone who respects it." An outsider looks at this and sees cash. You look at it and see your mother. That's the difference. Among those 13 stones, the one I remembered most was an 8. 6. Carat, oval-cut, white diamond, impeccable fire. Flawless water. Beside it sat a pigeon blood ruby, a deep blue sapphire, and an emerald with a distinct cloud inclusion resting diagonally in its heart. Dad told me that natural stones are like people. Their value isn't just in their immediate brilliance, but in the unique flaws and marks of time they carry. That same day, Dad handed me a thick folder. My mother's will, probate documents, gemological certificates, macro photography of the inclusions, insurance policies, and her handwritten ledger. I flipped to the page for the ruby and saw her handwriting, "Do not sell unless absolutely necessary." The red is beautiful, but it carries a heavy aura. The one who holds it must have clean hands. I broke down in tears. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "Cry all you need, Clara, but remember, the more valuable the legacy left behind, the clearer the paperwork must be. Clarity isn't about suspecting someone. It's about denying anyone the opportunity to lie." At that time, I had been married to Julian for nearly a year. He was still the hard-working guy who would drive me around Boston in his beat-up sedan looking for retail space. We would eat cheap diner pancakes at midnight, and he'd say things that were both funny and endearing. "One day I'll be selling million-dollar rocks to billionaires, but as long as I come home and eat meatloaf and mashed potatoes with you, my life is perfect." Julian knew about my mother's collection. Initially, he didn't ask for it. He just said, "Keep it locked up safe. I don't want anyone thinking I married you for your family's gems." That exact sentence made me trust him unconditionally. Women in love are often like that. One decent-sounding sentence is enough for us to build a whole house of trust in our hearts. It wasn't until 2016, when we were preparing to incorporate sterling and stone diamonds, that Julian finally brought up the collection. That evening, Dad had made a traditional Yankee pot roast. Julian brought home some artisan pizzas from the North End, joking that we needed startup fuel. The atmosphere was joyful. Julian served my dad a slice and said, "Arthur, I was thinking, if the 13 Dawns were displayed in our showroom, our brand would have a soul. Clients buying diamonds aren't just buying rocks, they're buying the legacy behind them." I looked at Dad. He didn't object immediately. He just asked, "Do you want to display them or do you want to inject them as company assets?" Julian chuckled. "Arthur, you're making me blush. That's Clara's inheritance from Evelyn. I just want to borrow the story to build the brand's prestige. That's all." Dad put his fork down. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone was crystal clear. If we are family, then we need to be strictly professional. A display is a display, a deposit is a deposit, and private property is private property. One day, when people's mouths try to change the story, the black and white ink will do the talking. Julian looked slightly embarrassed, but nodded. Of course, it's better to be thorough. As a businessman, paperwork gives me peace of mind. After dinner, I gently scolded my dad. "You made Julian uncomfortable." Dad gave a sad smile. better he feels uncomfortable for one night than you suffer for a lifetime. I didn't fully understand him then. I just thought he was getting old and paranoid. Back then, I trusted Julian with the naive faith of a newlywed. I believed he loved me, believed he understood the sacredness of my mother's legacy, and believed that once you call someone your spouse, you don't lay traps under their feet. And so, a legal contract for the deposit, display, and image licensing of the 13 Dawns was drafted. The company had the right to place the collection in a dedicated display area, photograph them, tell their origin story, and use them as brand symbols for a set term. However, the company was strictly forbidden from selling, pawning, transferring to another legal entity, claiming ownership, or using them as loan collateral without my direct, physical signature. Julian signed every page. I remember him joking as he signed. With all these signatures, my hands are going to cramp up like a surgeon's. Dad looked at him and replied, "Signatures are easy to write, Julian. It's the weight of the consequences that's hard to bear." We all laughed. I laughed too. Years later, looking back, that laughter felt more bitter than a cup of tea left out for days. Once the contract was finalized, Dad brought the collection to our first showroom, a rented 2-story brownstone on Newbury Street. The paint was still fresh. I was wiping down the glass cases while Julian stood by the door, calling clients. Dad placed each stone into the velvet displays, as careful as if he were laying pieces of my mother's soul to rest. Before locking the case, Dad pulled me aside. He pointed to the blue sapphire and said, "Look at that cloud inclusion resting diagonally inside. Remember it. In the future, no matter who changes its setting, its box, or its name, the real stone will always carry this birthmark." I chuckled. "Dad, you make it sound like a true crime podcast." He shook his head. "Life is much more bizarre than fiction, Clara. One wrong step, and you pay for it your whole life." That evening, Julian stood next to me in front of the display, his eyes gleaming. He held my hand and whispered, "Clara, I promise, I'm going to make this brand massive. One day, when people hear Sterling and Stone, they'll think of us." I believed him. I believed him so much that I didn't notice he heavily emphasized making it massive, but never said a word about keeping it clean. The old proverb is right. You can measure the depth of the ocean, but there is no ruler long enough to measure the human heart. The 13 Dawns sat quietly under the halogen lights, pure and radiant. Meanwhile, the heart of the man standing next to them, I would only realize years later, had begun to change colors very early on. In 2016, we launched Sterling and Stone Diamonds LLC. The gold lettering on the black awning looked incredibly luxurious, but inside, we had nothing but a few rushed display cabinets, an old safe my dad lent us, and a wobbly office desk. The corporate filing showed 4 founding partners. I held 47%. Julian held 43%. My father held 6%. As a guarantor of industry reputation, and Wallace Bennett held 4%. Uncle Wallace was a gem insurance appraiser who knew my dad from the days they inspected wholesale lots. He didn't manage operations. He just said, "I'll chip in a bit for luck, but mostly to make sure your paperwork is bulletproof from day one." Julian laughed it off. "Don't worry, Uncle Wallace. We play by the rules. When we make it big, you can just sit back, sip your coffee, and collect your dividends." Dad glanced at him. "Coffee is fine. Just don't brew it with muddy water." The room erupted in laughter. I laughed too, thinking it was just my dad being his usual cynical self. Only much later did I realize that older men who have seen the dark side of the world never just joke without dropping a seed of truth. During those first few months, I practically lived in the workshop. By day, I met with craftsmen, inspected stones, and adjusted ring molds. When the clients left, I sat under the glaring daylight lamps, holding a loupe, inspecting Malay diamonds the size of sesame seeds. Some days, my neck would cramp from leaning over. Julian would bring me a container of hot chicken noodle soup from the corner deli, jokingly saying, "Eat up, boss. If clients see a diamond vendor as skinny as a toothpick, they'll think we're broke." I rolled my eyes. Talk less, or my soup will get cold. Julian laughed. Then I'll sit right here and blow on it for you. Premium after-sales service. Those little moments made me believe we were an unbreakable team. It didn't matter if we weren't rich immediately, as long as we walked every step together. We'd eat breakfast bagels at dawn. Then he'd run off to meet clients while I stayed back to approve designs. I remember a rainy afternoon when Julian rolled up his trousers and carried heavy inventory boxes across the flooded street, a massive grin on his face. When we hit $40 million, make sure you write an ode to these soggy loafers, he said. I replied. Let's hit $1 million first, then you can dream about 40. But the company really did grow massive. Yet, before it got there, we survived countless grueling nights. I remember a VIP client urgently ordering 30 pairs of wedding bands for a massive society event. The craftsman messed up a microscopic detail on the prongs. I demanded they be melted down and redone. Julian, terrified of missing the deadline, frowned. You're being too difficult. The clients won't even notice. I placed the diamond back in the tray. They won't notice today, but in 5 years, when the stone comes loose, they will remember our name for the rest of their lives. In this industry, losing one client means losing their entire social circle. He fell silent, then finally nodded. Fine. You maintain the quality. I'll go beg them for a 2-day extension. That was when Julian still listened. He was a master networker. While I was an expert at catching details others ignored. I never denied his contributions. If he hadn't hustled the market, my designs would have stayed in my sketchbook. But if I hadn't maintained our rigorous standards, his brand would just be a pretty box filled with liabilities. The 13 Dawns collection was placed in the center of the showroom, housed in a double-locked glass case. Below each stone was a serial number and a short history, but absolutely no price tag. I reminded the staff, this isn't inventory. This is a private collection on display. If someone wants to buy one, offer to design something similar. Do not make promises. Chloe Harper was our new junior inventory manager at the time. Young, but meticulous. She logged every code into the ledger and asked, Clara, these are so gorgeous. It seems like a waste not to sell them. I smiled. Some things are meant to hold your reputation, not to be immediately traded for cash. I brought my mother's legacy here to give the brand a soul, not to be haggled over by whoever walks in. Julian, standing nearby, chimed in. Don't worry, Chloe. The 13 Dawns belong to Clara. The company is just borrowing their brilliance. I looked at him, my heart warming at his words. If only people who borrowed things knew how to return them, the world would have far fewer tragedies. Thanks to that collection, high-net-worth clients started seeking us out. They didn't just want a ring, they wanted to know who sourced the stones, who designed the settings, and why every gem had a story. I sat with these elite demanding clients, explaining the provenance of each piece. Julian stood beside me, smoothly converting those stories into lucrative contracts. He'd tell clients, my wife is a perfectionist. If she rejects a stone, I couldn't sell it to you even if I tried. The clients laughed, and so did I. Back then, I thought he said it because he was proud of me. Thinking back, perhaps he realized very early on. My credibility sold the inventory. In those first few years, the revenue wasn't astronomical, but the names Sterling and Stone began to command respect. We opened a small design studio in the back. I hired 2 junior jewelers, teaching them how to hold the tweezers and spot hidden fractures under cool lighting. I'd always tell them, don't be fooled by immediate sparkle. A diamond that's overly polished but lacks depth is just like a person who speaks eloquently but has an empty soul. Julian overheard this and burst out laughing. The way you say that, clients will think you're subtweeting someone. I replied, if the shoe fits, wear it. He laughed loudly. By 2020, we opened our second location in Chicago. By 2022, we expanded to Beverly Hills. At every ribbon cutting, Julian stood center stage, while I stood slightly behind him adjusting a model's necklace. People remembered his face. The media dubbed him a young business prodigy. I wasn't upset. I figured we were married. Credit to one was credit to both. My dad looked at a magazine spread once and asked, "Why are you always in the background?" I smiled. "I don't like the spotlight. Plus, Julian is a better public speaker." Dad sighed. "Standing behind him isn't wrong. I just worry that if you stand in the shadows too long, people will assume you were never there to begin." I heard him, but I brushed it off. Back then, my heart still fiercely defended my husband. By late 2022, as revenue skyrocketed, Julian got his own executive assistant, his own corner office, and his own private client schedule. He was still sweet to me, calling me honey in front of the staff. But I started being left off emails for financial meetings. When I asked, he'd smile. "It's just dry paperwork, Clara. Focus on the creative side. Let me handle the headaches." It sounded caring. But as time went on, I realized that sweet words are often used to quietly usher people out of the decision-making room without setting off alarms. Despite everything, I still trusted him. Whenever I locked the 13 Dons cabinet, I'd give Julian the spare key. I thought it was a symbol of marital trust. I didn't know that one day, that very key would become the thing I blamed myself for the most. Sterling & Stone grew day by day, transforming from a rented brownstone smelling of fresh paint into a brand with 3 flagship locations. But as the diamonds shined brighter, the shadows grew longer, and I, who thought I was standing behind him to keep his foundation solid, never expected to be entirely eclipsed by the shadow of the man in front of me. By late 2024, Sterling & Stone held its year-end board meeting at the flagship location on Newbury Street. Boston was freezing that day, the wind tearing through the barren trees. Inside the boardroom, the warm lights illuminated a long table covered in financial reports, valuation documents, and thermoses of coffee my dad had brought. I sat to Julian's left. In front of me was a 100-page valuation report by a top consulting firm. On the first page, the estimated enterprise value was stated clearly. $40 million. That number silenced the room for a few seconds before a murmur swept through. Chloe Harper, who had worked her way up to head of inventory, whispered to the accountant, "$40 million. Makes me want to drop my own wedding ring." I heard her and almost chuckled. But that day, I couldn't bring myself to smile. Looking at that number, I felt a mix of pride and a strange creeping coldness. When you're climbing a brutal mountain, people hold hands. But once you reach the summit, everyone starts looking down to see exactly how much territory is under their own boots. The valuation report detailed our 3 locations: the VIP network, the gemstone inventory, exclusive designs, and brand equity. The 13 Dons collection was mentioned as a symbolic asset, but it was not calculated as company property. I underlined that sentence with a red pen. Julian saw it and smirked slightly. "You're too meticulous, Clara. They just put that in to make the portfolio look prestigious." I replied, "Prestigious is fine, but it needs to be accurate. The 13 Dons are my private property. The company only holds exhibition rights." He leaned back in his swivel chair, tapping his pen. I know. You remind me constantly. Even the display case probably has it memorized by now." A few people chuckled. I smiled faintly, but my stomach dropped. In the past, whenever I asserted the boundaries of the assets, he would nod immediately. Lately, he had started giving me these dismissive smirks. After the meeting, Julian treated the executive team to dinner at a high-end steakhouse in the seaport. The table was full of filet mignon, oysters, and vintage Cabernet. He stood up and raised his glass, his voice booming. "Today, Sterling & Stone hit $40 million. This isn't just one person's effort. It's the blood and sweat of this entire team." The room applauded, and I clapped along. But immediately after, he continued, "To go further, we have to think bigger." Sterling and Stone is a beautiful name, but it feels a bit mom and pop. I want to build a new brand, something international, something aggressive. A junior executive asked, "Are you planning a rebrand, Julian?" Julian smiled, shooting a fleeting glance at me. "I'm considering Thorn Luxury Estate Diamonds." The festive mood at the table instantly stalled. I set my water glass down. "Since when are we discussing this? Why haven't I heard about it?" Julian kept smiling. "It's just a brainstorm, but the market demands a powerhouse name right now. Having a name tied to your family legacy is cute, but to attract VC funding and expand, we need a name that commands authority." I stared at him. His logic sounded perfectly corporate, but what chilled me to the bone was that he was pitching this to our employees without having discussed it with me, his wife, and the majority shareholder. A decision regarding the history of our company, and I was hearing it like a guest at a dinner party. I spoke slowly. Sterling and Stone isn't just a name, it's a guarantee of provenance and craftsmanship. Clients come to us because they trust the quality, not because the name sounds European or aggressive. Julian took a sip of his wine, his voice soft but his eyes hard. "You think too small, Clara. Wealthy clients today buy an image. If we stay stuck in the past, we'll never scale." My dad, sitting at the far end of the table, put his fork down and asked, "Julian, rebranding isn't a sin. But if you change the name, do you change the origin story too?" Julian paused, then laughed smoothly. "Don't worry, Arthur. The story will always be our family's story." Dad looked right through him. "And which family is our family?" That question brought a dead silence over the table. I quickly jumped in. "Dad, it's a celebration tonight." He didn't push it, but his eyes stayed locked on Julian for a long time. That night, back at our penthouse, I asked him directly, "Do you really want to rebrand the company?" Julian took off his suit jacket, tossing it over a chair, acting completely nonchalant. "Yeah, it has to happen eventually. Thorn Luxury sounds sophisticated and dominant." I gave a dry laugh. "And what about Sterling?" "That name is me. It's my mother's legacy. It's my family's collection." Julian turned around, losing his patience. "Clara, stop making everything about your mother, your father, and your collection. Without me out there hustling and selling, do you really think those rocks would have magically turned into a $40 million empire?" That sentence paralyzed me. I wasn't angry that he was claiming credit. I was furious because, in one breath, he reduced all our success to the work of a salesman. The craftsmanship, the heritage, the caution, the endless nights I spent burning my eyes out under the loupe, all of it was suddenly blown away like dust. I looked at him, enunciating every word. "I have never denied your salesmanship, but no matter how good the salesman is, he doesn't have the right to erase the owner of the goods." Julian scowled. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means the 13 Dons do not belong to this corporation, and the Sterling name cannot be erased just because you don't think it sounds dominant enough." He smirked. "Keep being this stubborn, Clara. Let's see how far it gets you. Going far but forgetting the way home is just called getting lost, Julian." The conversation ended there. He walked into the master bathroom, and I sat in the living room listening to the shower running, my heart incredibly heavy. They say a husband and wife united can drain the ocean. But if one person starts acting like the ocean belongs only to him, the other becomes nothing but a hired deckhand. After that night, I was gradually excluded from branding strategy meetings. Julian claimed it was just PR stuff that he and his new team would handle. A few of my designs were returned with instructions to remove my initials, CS, from the inner band on the CAD files because it didn't align with the new brand guidelines. I objected, but Julian brushed it off. "It's just a technical detail, Clara. Stop overreacting." But I knew. Erasing someone always starts in the smallest, most obscure places. Today, it's the signature on a blueprint. Tomorrow, it's the bio in the catalog. Until finally, the person who was there from day one is spoken of as if they never existed. My dad heard about this and just gave me one piece of advice. Save every email, every board minute, and every original sketch. I sighed. You're being paranoid again, Dad. He looked at me. I'm not paranoid. I just see Julian's shadow growing much faster than his conscience. I still wanted to trust my husband, but by then my trust was like a diamond with a hidden fracture. It looks flawless on the outside, but strike it at just the right angle, and it shatters. At the end of that year, during an internal presentation, Julian revealed the new corporate direction. On the very first slide, the words Thorn Luxury Estate Diamonds dwarfed the Sterling & Stone logo. Below it was the tagline, An American Diamond Legacy, Reimagined. Seeing those words, my chest tightened. Whose legacy? Who gave him permission to use the word legacy when the guardian of that legacy hadn't even nodded? Julian stood confidently in front of the screen, preaching to the young associates about the future. I sat in the back, amid the applause, realizing for the first time that I was watching the locks being changed on my own house from the inside. The company had hit 40 million. But it was exactly at that number that human greed revealed its true price. Sienna Caldwell appeared at the office on a brisk November morning. She walked into the showroom wearing a chic camel trench coat, her hair blown out perfectly, holding an iPad, and offering a meticulously measured smile. She possessed that modern, effortless, ruthless corporate confidence. Julian introduced her with suspicious ease. Clara, this is Sienna Caldwell. She'll be taking over PR and brand positioning. I brought her on to prepare us for the next phase. I was inspecting a batch of wedding bands at the jeweler's bench. I set down my loupe. The next phase? Why wasn't this discussed with me? Julian offered a placating smile. I was going to tell you. We're scaling up. We can't keep operating like a boutique. Sienna immediately stepped forward, extending a hand. It's such an honor, Clara. Julian told me you are the absolute soul of the product here. I look forward to learning from you. Her words were perfectly polished, but as her eyes scanned the showroom, she looked less like a student and more like an interior designer, calculating which walls to tear down, which logos to replace, and how to scrub the space of its previous owner. I remained polite. Welcome, Sienna. PR is great, but any content regarding the gem provenance, the 13 Dawns collection, and our founding story must go through me for approval. Sienna smiled brightly. Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't dream of stepping on your toes when it comes to the technical stuff. Julian patted her shoulder lightly. Sienna is a pro, Clara. Don't be so intense. I stared at his hand resting on her shoulder, just a fraction of a second longer than appropriate. A wife doesn't need an explanation to recognize when a touch crosses the line of the strictly professional. From the day Sienna joined, things moved at a breakneck pace. She ordered new photo shoots for the showroom, redesigned the catalogs, and launched aggressive social media campaigns. The younger staff adored her, and Julian constantly praised her. See? That's what fresh thinking looks like. I wasn't against innovation, but innovating is different from erasing. Sienna proposed changing the design credits from Designed by Clara Sterling to the Thorn creative team. I asked her why. She replied, Clara, a luxury empire shouldn't rely on a single personality cult. We need clients to trust the institution, the system, I countered. But those are my literal drawings. Crediting the actual designer doesn't make a brand less professional. She gave a patronizing smile. I hear you. It's just, if we undergo corporate restructuring down the line, an individual's name gets legally messy. The word restructuring made me freeze. I turned to Julian. He just waved a hand dismissively. Whatever is best for the brand's valuation, we'll consider. Clara, stop being so defensive. I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I refused to turn a boardroom into a marital tug-of-war. However, Later that afternoon, when I walked back to grab a sketchbook I'd forgotten, I heard Sienna's voice emanating from the PR office. The door was cracked open. The new logo has to scream old money. The Sterling and Stone vibe is way too anchored to the wife. If we want to go global, we have to ditch this image of a woman hunching over a workbench squinting at rocks. High-end clients are buying a fantasy, not a magnifying glass. I stood in the hallway, gripping my folder. Her words weren't vulgar, but they were deeply humiliating. She was taking a sledgehammer to the very thing I was most proud of. I pushed the door open. The room fell dead silent. Sienna turned around, freezing for a microsecond before instantly recovering her pristine smile. "Oh, Clara, did you need something?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I came to get my sketches. And to remind you of something. Clients might not be buying a magnifying glass, but without the woman looking through it, they might end up buying flawed stones at premium prices." Her smile strained. "Oh, I was just brainstorming out loud. In a $40 million business, brainstorming should be grounded in reality." I turned and walked away. I didn't hear any laughter behind me. From that day on, I knew I was a thorn in her side. Work was toxic, but home was suffocating. Eleanor Thorne began bringing up Sienna at every family dinner. One day she'd praise her wardrobe, the next she'd say, "That Sienna is so sharp. A modern woman knows how to elevate her husband's status, instead of hiding in a dusty workshop smelling of metal. Who finds that attractive?" I set down my soup spoon, keeping my voice steady. "Eleanor, I've been in this trade since before I met Julian. If it weren't for the workshop, this lifestyle wouldn't exist." She shot me a glaring look. "I'm not denying your little hobby, but a married woman needs to know how to keep her husband. You're great at inspecting diamonds, but clearly, you can't inspect your own marriage." My throat closed up. Julian was sitting next to me, peeling a shrimp. I waited for him to speak up. Instead, he just dropped the peeled shrimp onto my plate and muttered, "She's getting old, Clara. Just let it go." I stared at the shrimp on my plate. A husband who lacks the spine to defend his wife against blatant disrespect, yet thinks peeling a piece of seafood is enough to smooth it over. A few days later was Eleanor's birthday. I personally ordered a custom cake, bought a silk scarf, and spent hours preparing a formal roast dinner at my in-laws' house. I made prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes, and roasted asparagus. Just as I finished setting the table, Sienna walked in with Julian. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Thorne." Sienna beamed. "I didn't know exactly what you liked, so I picked out these pearl earrings. I hope you love them." Eleanor lit up. "Oh, you are just too sweet. Come, sit right here next to me." Julian caught my eye and muttered. She was on my way, so I gave her a ride. She handles our PR. It's good for her to be close with the family. The family. Those two words sounded utterly grotesque. Since when did a PR director need to be so integrated into my mother-in-law's birthday? During dinner, Sienna poured wine for Eleanor. Eleanor held her hand, patting it affectionately. "If only this house had a daughter-in-law as thoughtful as you, I wouldn't be so depressed." The entire dining room went silent. The clink of my fork hitting my porcelain plate echoed loudly. Julian frowned not because his mother was out of line, but because he was terrified I would make a scene. I put my fork down and looked directly at Eleanor. Saying that in front of me, "Do you not feel any shame?" She sneered. "I'm stating a fact. You've been here for years, given us no grandchildren, and your domestic skills are purely superficial. What's the point of hoarding diamonds if your home is a cold, empty shell?" Sienna quickly interjected, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Mrs. Thorne, please don't say that. You're making Clara upset." I looked at her. A defense wrapped in honey, but the honey was full of glass shards. The more she spoke, the more I looked like a pathetic victim at my own dinner party. Julian put his glass down. "Enough. It's Mom's birthday. Let's just drop it." That was it. Not a single word dedicated to me. "No, Mom. Do not disrespect my wife. I suddenly understood that a seat at this table had already been prepared for Sienna. The woman who had called Eleanor mom for a decade, was just a guest sitting in the wrong chair. When we got home, Julian told me, "You need to stop being so hostile. Sienna is just an employee. My mom only likes her because she's charismatic." I asked, "What kind of employee attends your mother's private birthday, pours her wine like a daughter-in-law, and allows your mother to compare her to your wife?" He stayed quiet for a long moment, then said, "You are becoming incredibly difficult to live with." I gave a bitter laugh. "No, I'm just finally waking up." From that night on, I stopped looking at Sienna as just an ambitious young woman climbing the corporate ladder. I saw her as a replacement chair that had been pulled up right next to my husband, just waiting for me to stand up so she could sit down. And the most agonizing part was that the person who pulled out that chair was Julian. In early 2025, Boston was hit by a bitter, biting cold. I thought the chill was only outside, but I never expected an even deeper freeze was waiting for me inside my own home. That day, Julian asked me to come home early. His text was brief. "We need to talk seriously tonight." Those 7 words ruined my entire afternoon. A woman's intuition is terrifying. The husband hasn't even spoken, but the heart already hears the sound of a door slamming shut. I walked into our condo just before 7 p.m. The dining table was empty. No dinner, no smell of food, no weekend flowers, just a neat stack of papers. Next to it was Julian's black Mont Blanc pen. He sat on the leather sofa, wearing a crisp white dress shirt, the cuffs rolled up, exposing the Patek Philippe watch I had gifted him for our 5th anniversary. His face was so detached I felt like a stranger who had accidentally walked into a board meeting. I dropped my bag. "What's going on?" Julian glanced at the papers, then slid them across the glass coffee table toward me. "Clara, I want a divorce." I heard every syllable clearly, but it took my brain several seconds to process that they were landing on my life. Divorce. It wasn't loud. There was no screaming, no shattered glass. It was just freezing, like a diamond left in a vault too long. I pulled up a chair and sat down. "Say that again." He exhaled, his tone monotonous. "I think we're both exhausted. We aren't compatible anymore. Let's have a civilized split. Let's not make it ugly." I looked at him. The man who once carried heavy inventory through the rain with me, who ate midnight diner food dreaming of our first store, was now pitching a divorce like a Q4 earnings report. I picked up the papers. It was a pre-drafted settlement agreement. The further I read, the colder my fingertips became. Under the asset division, Julian stated he would provide a $300,000 transitional support buyout. Sterling & Stone, however, was listed as having completed its corporate restructuring and executive transition in late 2024. My name was completely scrubbed from the executive board. The brand equity, client data, and my proprietary design patents were all consolidated under a new corporate entity solely controlled by Julian. I looked up. "You call this support?" He didn't flinch. "It's enough for you to live comfortably. You can go open a cute little boutique and design whatever you want." I let out a dry, hacking laugh. I couldn't even recognize my own voice. "I built this company with you from a single glass display case, and now you're offering me $300,000 to go open a cute little boutique?" He frowned. "Don't act like I'm throwing you out on the street. I'm looking out for you. Are you looking out for me? Or are you looking out for your pristine corporate filings?" His jaw tightened. He stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Boston skyline. "Clara, you don't belong in corporate warfare. You're too emotional. Clients today don't just want good stones. They want PR. They want an image. Let me handle that." I spoke slowly. "And the 13 Dawns?" He turned back. "You can keep a few pieces for sentimental reasons, but the rest are deeply tied to the brand's valuation. Extracting them right now would cause a massive legal headache." I slammed the papers down. "That is my mother's inheritance. The company only has the right to display them. Legal headache for who, Julian? He went quiet. Then, his voice dropped an octave. If you're going to be this petty and litigious, then what did our marriage even mean? That sentence hurt more than the word divorce. When he needed to absorb my assets, he invoked the sanctity of marriage. When he wanted to hoard the executive power, he called me unfit for corporate warfare. Just then, the front door clicked open. Eleanor Thorne walked in, as if she had been waiting for her cue. She carried a patent leather handbag, her makeup immaculate, her heavy perfume completely masking the faint smell of ginger tea I had left in the kitchen that morning. She glanced at the papers, then at me. Just sign it and be done with it. A woman's true class shows when she knows when to walk away gracefully, not when she tries to drain a man dry. I stood up, my throat constricting. Eleanor, this is between my husband and me. Can you please let us speak privately? She sneered. Husband? He just asked for a divorce. You couldn't give me a grandchild. You couldn't keep him interested. And now you want to steal his company? The business is in his name. Do not make this difficult. I turned to Julian. I waited for him to say, Mom, don't speak to Clara that way. But Julian just looked down and adjusted his watch. The watch I bought him flashed under the recessed lighting, shameless and glaring. I looked back at Eleanor, my voice shaking but my spine straight. You don't have to love me, Eleanor. But I am asking you not to refer to my life's work as draining a man. I am not asking for a single cent that doesn't belong to me. She scoffed. Oh, you speak so beautifully. But once a woman is out of her husband's house, she ought to know her place, lest she become a laughingstock. I picked up the pen. Julian visibly relaxed. Eleanor sat down, a smirk playing on her lips. They probably thought I had finally surrendered, but I only signed the page dissolving the marriage. When I got to the clauses regarding the forfeiture of shares, the transfer of private assets, and the relinquishing of rights to the 13 Dons, I put the pen down. Julian frowned. Why didn't you sign the rest? I looked dead into his eyes. Because I am divorcing you. I am not divorcing my mother's legacy, and I am absolutely not signing away my shares without a proper, audited buyout agreement. He lowered his voice, menacing. You are making this incredibly hard on me, Clara. No, I replied. I'm just refusing to make it hard on myself. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. Are you trying to pull a fast one? I no longer called her mom, but I kept my manners. Mrs. Thorne, I signed for the divorce. As for whose assets are whose, the legal paperwork will do the talking. Julian stared at me for a long time. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a husband. They were the eyes of a man trapped between a meticulously planned heist and a missing signature. Finally, he said coldly, Fine. If you want an audit, we'll do an audit. But don't blame me when this gets ugly. I smiled sadly. Julian, grace doesn't mean forcing someone to sign away their life when they are bleeding. That night, I dragged my suitcase out of the penthouse. I didn't take much. A few changes of clothes, some old sketchbooks, and a wooden box containing thank you notes from my oldest clients. Walking past the Thorne family antique credenza, I stopped and gave a small nod. Even if the living were cruel to me, I still showed respect to the house. When I got down to the street, the icy wind whipped my face. I walked a few blocks and saw a late-night diner still open. I ordered a bowl of hot chicken noodle soup and sat in a vinyl booth. The soup was steaming, but when I brought the spoon to my mouth, I couldn't swallow. The older waitress looked at me gently. Too salty, honey? I shook my head. No, the soup is perfect. My throat just feels a little tight tonight. She sighed. When it's tight, you gotta eat slow, sweetheart. Life is like that. When it's hard to swallow, don't try to force it all down at once. I looked down, a single tear dropping onto the back of my hand. I wasn't crying because I missed Julian. I was crying because I finally saw, with terrifying clarity, that the man I built a house with had just opened the door and evicted me. I thought the divorce papers were the end of it, but sitting there by my lukewarm soup, I had no idea that it was only the opening gambit of a much larger chess match, a match Julian had designed to steal my very name from the diamond industry. The next morning, I woke up to a foggy Boston skyline. My childhood room in my dad's house still smelled of cedar and dried tea leaves. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase at my feet, feeling like I had just returned from a grueling deployment. Julian's words echoed in my head. If you want to grab your personal things from the showroom in a few days, let management know in advance. He made it sound as if Sterling and Stone was a place I had never belonged. I went down to the kitchen. Dad was brewing coffee. On the island counter were bagels and cream cheese. He looked at me. Where are you rushing off to so early? I'm going to the showroom to get some things. Old sketches, my design ledgers, personal items, I replied. Dad slid a mug toward me. Go, if you must. But remember, don't get into a shouting match at the door. You're going there to collect your things, yes, but also to see exactly what they've done to the place. The flagship showroom was located right on Newbury Street. In the past, it always smelled faintly of white tea diffusers. The staff would greet clients warmly under lights that made the glass counters gleam. But that morning, standing outside, it felt as foreign as a stranger's house. The Sterling and Stone sign was still there, but a massive vinyl banner hung right next to it, Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds. The new chapter of an American diamond legacy. The words Thorne Luxury were printed in massive, glossy letters, dwarfing the old name. My throat went dry. I pulled out my key card and tapped it on the staff entrance scanner. The light flashed red. I tapped it again. Red. Toby, the young security guard, jogged out. When he saw me, all the color drained from his face. Miss Sterling. I looked at him. Toby, why isn't my card working? He fidgeted. HR updated the access protocols yesterday. I'm just following Mr. Thorne's orders, ma'am. I spoke very slowly. Julian ordered you to lock me out? Toby looked down. I'm so sorry, miss. Sterling. I don't blame you, Toby. Just buzz me in. I need my personal belongings. If you need to, call Julian to confirm. Toby made a call. The person on the other end wasn't Julian. It was his executive assistant, Derek Winslow. Clara. Derek's voice came through Toby's radio. Julian is tied up right now. If you need your things, you can wait in the client lounge and a staff member will bring them down. The design, studio, and vault are restricted access right now. I grabbed the radio from Toby. Derek, I am a founding shareholder. I am not a walk-in retail customer. I am not waiting in a lounge. Derek paused. His voice slick with corporate PR training. I understand, Clara. But the company is undergoing restructuring. Julian instructed us to limit access to non-operational personnel in the secure zones. Non-operational personnel. The phrase sent an icy spike down my spine. I handed the radio back to Toby. Open the door. The glass door clicked open. I walked into the showroom that used to be mine. Everything had changed. The old framed photo of Julian and me from our grand opening was gone. In its place was a massive solo portrait of Julian holding a flawless diamond under dramatic lighting. The plaque read, Julian Thorne, founder and visionary. Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds. A new receptionist asked nervously, Do you have an appointment, ma'am? She must have been a new hire. I was about to say I am Clara Sterling, but the words felt both useless and agonizing. I headed straight for the stairs to the design studio. The receptionist panicked. Ma'am! You need an access code for that area. I ignored her and walked up to the second floor. The heavy door to the design studio where I had spent thousands of hours had a brand new electronic keypad installed. I punched in my old code. Error. I punched it in again. Error. The harsh electronic beep echoed in the hallway. I rested my hand on the cold door. Inside, I could hear voices, the scraping of chairs, the hum of the 3D printer, the sounds of my life's work, locked behind a piece of metal. Just then, Chloe Harper hurried down the hall. Wearing her Navy uniform, clutching a stack of inventory manifest to her chest, she went pale when she saw me. "Clara, what are you doing up here?" I looked at her. "I came for my things. Did the access codes change?" Chloe looked around frantically, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Don't stay up here too long. They installed new cameras. Julian said anyone who lets you into the back office will be terminated immediately." I looked into her eyes. "Chloe, what exactly is going on here?" Her eyes welled up with tears, and she bit her lip hard. After a moment, she whispered, "Just go back downstairs. I'm terrified." I didn't press her, but my heart began hammering against my ribs. I walked back down to the main exhibition floor. The central glass vault housing the 13 Dawns was still there, bathed in stark white light. But the brass plaque had been replaced. It no longer read, "The 13 Dawns, private collection of the Sterling family, on exhibition." Instead, a blindingly polished gold plaque read, "The Thorn Heritage Collection, the foundation of a $40 million diamond empire." I stood dead still. My mother's name was gone. My name was gone. The words private collection were gone. It had all been swallowed up by the name Thorn. I pressed my fingers against the glass. It was ice cold. In my mind, I saw my mother sitting at her oak desk, carefully penning the history of each stone in her ledger. She had guarded those gems like they were the honor of our family. And now, they had swapped the label like it was cheap packaging on a mass-produced toy. I turned to the catalog display. A stack of brand-new, glossy lookbooks sat there. I opened one. Every single engagement ring I had designed over the last decade was printed under the header, "Signature Creations by Visionary Julian Thorn." Not a single syllable mentioned me. I let out a soft laugh. It hurt so much my eyes burned. The receptionist looked at me, alarmed. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I closed the book. "I'm fine. I just witnessed a magic trick. Someone made a human being disappear from her own life's work." I turned toward the door just as Chloe rushed down the stairs, awkwardly shoving a canvas tote bag at me. "Your things, ma'am." I took the bag. Inside were a few old sketchbooks, a silk scarf I kept at my desk, and some specialized drafting pencils. But as my fingers grazed the bottom of the bag, I felt a small, tightly folded square of paper. Chloe refused to make eye contact. She whispered, barely moving her lips, "Don't open it here. Are you okay, Chloe?" I asked. She offered a broken, crooked smile. "I'm only okay as long as I have a paycheck, Clara. But there are some things. If you stay quiet too long, you become an accomplice." She spun on her heel and practically sprinted away. I walked out of the showroom. The freezing drizzle felt like mist. I walked 3 blocks before stepping under the awning of a North End bakery to unfold the note. It contained one scribbled sentence. The old inventory logs might not be totally gone. Do not trust the new ledger. I stood under the awning, reading that sentence over and over. In my head, a bell tolled with absolute clarity. They were rewriting history. I stopped crying. The pain was still there, but it now had a shape. A target. A person can be locked out of a building, but if they built that building with their bare hands, they have every right to ask who authorized the lock change. I crushed the note in my fist. Julian had deactivated my card, changed the locks, scrubbed my name from the website, and rebranded my mother's heirloom collection. But he forgot one crucial thing. In this world, deleting a name off a website is easy. Deleting the original paper trail is not. I headed back to my dad's house. This time, my steps didn't falter. I knew I had been erased from Sterling and Stone. But I also knew that a man in a rush to erase someone's name is usually a man terrified of it. I arrived home as the afternoon light faded. The sleet clung to my coat, but the chill was nothing compared to the sentence in my pocket. Dad was sitting on the enclosed porch, a steaming mug of black tea in front of him. He didn't ask questions. He just waited for me to set down my emotional baggage. I pulled out a chair and emptied the canvas tote onto the table. The worn sketchbooks, the silk scarf, the pencils, the new Thorn luxury catalog, and Chloe's note. Dad picked up the catalog. He slowly turned the glossy pages until he hit the Thorn Heritage Collection spread. The corner of his eye twitched. They changed the name of the collection? I nodded, feeling a lump of cotton in my throat. Mom's name is gone. Mine is gone. On the website, the only founder listed is Julian. Dad set the catalog down. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was soft, but to me, it sounded like a vault door slamming shut. Did you cry in there? I shook my head. No, Dad. I just stood and watched. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. Good. Some places don't deserve your tears. Tears are like currency, Clara. Spend them in the wrong place and it's just a waste. That actually made me laugh a little, though my eyes stung. I handed him Chloe's note. He read it, his expression darkening. The old inventory logs might not be totally gone. He repeated the words softly, then stood up and walked into his study. The study was in the back of the house, heavy with the scent of old paper, mahogany, and polishing oil. He opened a tall filing cabinet, taking a brass key from a hidden drawer. Come here, Clara. Inside the locked drawer wasn't gold or jewelry, but stacks of manila folders, each sealed in plastic and meticulously dated in my dad's handwriting. He pulled out a thick file and set it on the desk. This is your mother's estate file. I opened it. On top was her notarized will, the probate decrees, and the itemized list of the 13 gems. Behind that were the GIA certificates, macro photos of inclusions, insurance binders, and her handwritten notes. Touching her handwriting felt like ripping a scab off a fresh wound. A gem certificate only tells you what the stone is, Dad said. But to prove who owns it, you need the inheritance records, the legal contracts, and the handover manifests. Julian is a businessman. He knows this. He cannot plead ignorance. I flipped to the next document. The original contract. The header read, Bailment, Exhibition, and Image Licensing Agreement for the 13 Dawns collection. Below were the signatures. Mine, Julian's, the corporate seal of Sterling & Stone LLC, and a notary stamp. I read the clause out loud. The company is strictly prohibited from selling, pledging, transferring, incorporating into corporate assets, leveraging as collateral, or assigning to another legal entity without the direct, physical signature of Clara Sterling. I looked at my dad. You kept the original? I kept one. You were supposed to have one, and the company has one, he replied. But con men usually only remember the copy they have in their own filing cabinet. I exhaled. For the first time in days, the crushing weight on my chest lifted. Dad pulled out another folder. These are the capitalization records from 2016. The founding shareholder minutes. And here are the emails Julian sent to Uncle Wallace Bennett, confirming that the 13 Dawns were your personal property, used solely to boost brand prestige during the startup phase. I stared at the printed email. Julian's name was right there at the top. The collection is the sole property of my wife. The LLC is only displaying them per the agreement. He typed those words himself. I gave a bitter smile. He remembered it clearly back then. How convenient of him to forget now. Dad poured me a cup of tea. Greedy men don't actually forget, Clara. They just pray that everyone else does. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Meredith Hayes, an attorney and an old friend of my dad's. I had seen her at a few of my mother's memorials. She was in her 40s, her hair in a low bun, her voice soft but her eyes piercingly sharp. Hi, Clara, Meredith said, setting her briefcase on the table. Arthur filled me in. If you want to keep your dignity, You stop acting out of anger immediately. Every text, every social media post, every document can become evidence if we handle it correctly. I asked, Meredith, if they altered the inventory logs and rebranded my mother's collection, what's our first move? Meredith opened her legal pad. First, we index every original document. Second, we hire a forensic tech to archive the current website, catalogs, and PR articles to prove intent. Third, we contact witnesses, but we do not pressure them until they are legally protected. Chloe is an employee. She has her own fears. I nodded. Dad slid the folders toward Meredith. Take a look. I want every step to be airtight. We don't need noise. We just need the law. Meredith reviewed the exhibition contract, tracing the clauses with her pen. This file is pristine, but we don't deploy it yet. If Julian sent you a VIP invite to the launch gala, it means they are using a highly publicized event to legitimize the theft. That gala might be the exact place we force them to answer. I looked at my dad. He didn't say a word, just took a slow sip of tea. His calmness was terrifying. It turned out his comment about a hell of a show wasn't just a figure of speech. Did you suspect Julian was going to do this? I asked quietly. Dad looked up at the portrait of my mother on the wall. From the day he started referring to your mother's collection as company collateral. Slipping up once is a mistake. Slipping up repeatedly means you're practicing a lie until it sounds natural. Outside, the sleet had stopped. The distant hum of Boston traffic drifted in. Suddenly, my dad's old house didn't feel small anymore. It held a vault of truth that Julian Thorne thought he had buried under red carpets and crystal chandeliers. That night, Meredith and I organized files until midnight. Which document proved ownership? Which one proved the company was only a Bailey? Which one proved my equity stake? Which one proved Julian knew the boundaries? We tagged everything. At one point, I said, I just want to post the truth online so everyone knows he's lying. Dad, let them spin their PR. The louder they talk, the more valuable your paperwork becomes, Meredith agreed. Remember, Clara, we don't win by shouting the loudest. We win with documents they cannot legally refute. Dear listeners, if you saw your life's work being erased by someone you loved, would you stay quiet to save? And will the old jeweler's lockbox be enough to drag the truth into the light? That night, before I went to sleep, I pulled up the digital invite again. Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds. The gold letters practically glowed. But this time, I didn't feel like a humiliated victim being dragged to the slaughter. I was simply a chess player waiting for my turn to move. On Thursday afternoon, while Meredith and I were sorting files, my phone buzzed. The caller ID said Eleanor Thorne. I stared at it before answering. Her voice was uncharacteristically sweet. Clara, honey. Come over for dinner tonight. We used to be family after all. I want to do this properly. The way she switched back to calling me honey made my stomach churn. I had fought for a decade for her affection, and now she was offering it as bait. I looked at Dad. He was polishing his loupe and muttered, Go if you want. Eating is eating. Signing is signing. All right, I told her. I'll be there. At 7 p.m., I arrived at the Thorne family estate in Brookline. The sprawling colonial house was lit up. I knew this kitchen intimately. I had cooked and washed dishes in it for years, but walking through the door, I felt like a trespasser. The dining room table was lavishly set. A massive prime rib, roasted potatoes, creamed spinach, Yorkshire puddings, a classic American Sunday roast used to signal family warmth. But the air was so frigid you could see your breath. Eleanor sat at the head of the table. To her side sat her brother, Uncle Richard, and a cousin, Greg. Julian sat next to his mother, and there, sitting demurely in a beige cashmere dress, was Sienna Caldwell. Eleanor smiled. You made it. Sit down. The food is hot. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Good evening, Eleanor. Richard. Greg. Eleanor flinched at the lack of mom. Julian stared at me. Richard tried to smooth things over. Well, marriages end, but we can still be civilized. I nodded. I agree. That's why I came. Eleanor served me a slice of beef, her tone saccharine. Eat up, Clara. You look so thin. The stress must be getting to you. Sienna poured me sparkling water. Her voice soft. Clara, please hydrate. I know this transition has been hard on you, but Julian has immense respect for you. It sounded polite, but at this table, it was a psychological needle. She spoke for Julian with intimate authority, positioning me as the tragic, fragile ex. I looked at her. Thank you, Sienna, but I'm perfectly fine. When you spend a decade analyzing diamonds under harsh lights, you learn not to flinch at a little glare. Sienna's smile tightened. She looked down. We ate a few bites before Eleanor abruptly set her fork down. Right on cue, Julian pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and slid it to the center of the table. I wasn't surprised. Dad was right. The roast beef was just the appetizer. The legal release was the main course. Eleanor cleared her throat. I invited you here tonight to settle this cleanly. You and Julian are divorced. The Thorn Luxury Gala is on Saturday. Investors, media, and society will be watching. Sign this document confirming you have no further claims against the new entity, and we can all save face. I picked up the document. It was a non-disparagement and total release of claims. It stated I surrendered any rights to Thorn Luxury Estate Diamonds, its IP, and the legacy assets carried over from Sterling and Stone. I set it back down. I'm not signing this. Eleanor's face hardened. You haven't even read the whole thing. I read enough. This isn't about saving face. This is about legally erasing me. Uncle Richard slammed his wine glass down. Listen here, Clara. I don't mean to be harsh, but a woman who leaves the marriage doesn't get to take the family business. Julian built this. He deserves to keep it. I kept my tone respectful. Richard, this is an LLC, not the Thorne family backyard. I am a founding shareholder with documented equity. Furthermore, the 13 Dawns collection is an inheritance from my late mother. The company only holds a display license. Cousin Greg frowned. But you kept them in the company vault for years. Clients looked at them in the store. You can't just claim they're yours now. I shot back. If you put your cash in a bank vault for 10 years, does the bank get to tell you it's their money? The table fell dead silent. Julian glared at me, his eyes dark. Sienna's perfect posture faltered. Eleanor slammed her hand on the mahogany table. Don't you quote legalities at us. Julian offered you $300,000. What more do you want? I looked at her for a long time. I had truly wanted her to love me once. But if someone doesn't want to love you, you could hand them a tray of solid gold and they'd still treat you like a beggar. You bring up $300,000 like it's enough to buy my life's work, I said. But the divorce settlement had no buyout clause for my equity. It had no deed of gift for my private assets. That transitional support does not miraculously turn my mother's legacy into your family's property. Eleanor's face went red. Who are you calling your family? You aren't a Thorne anymore. I nodded. You're right. I am no longer a Thorne. But my mother's diamonds were never married to your son. Richard sucked in a breath. Greg looked at Julian. Julian finally spoke, his voice forced. Clara, why are you escalating this? Just sign it. I will wire an additional $150,000 to your account tomorrow. Consider it a final gesture of goodwill. I laughed out loud. Julian, if your goodwill costs $150,000, it sounds less like an amicable split and a lot more like hush money. Sienna immediately intervened. Clara, please think about this. If you make a scene, the media won't take your side. They'll just paint you as a jealous ex-wife trying to ruin Julian's big launch. I turned to her. Sienna, are you acting as the PR director right now, Or as the Thorne family consigliere trying to extort my signature? She stiffened. I'm trying to protect everyone's image. No. You're trying to protect the fiction you're currently writing for Thorne Luxury. The air in the room became suffocating. A table full of expensive food, but not an ounce of decency. Eleanor stood up abruptly. Are you going to sign it or not? I grabbed my purse and stood up. No. If this dinner was just an ambush to get me to legally delete myself, I'm leaving. Eleanor pointed a shaking finger at me. If you ruin my son's gala, this entire city will know you as a greedy, barren woman who came crawling back for a $40 million payout. I looked at her, the pain giving way to absolute numbness. Say whatever you want to the press, but the paper trail doesn't care about society gossip. I bowed my head politely to Richard and Greg, then walked out. Behind me, Julian called out, Clara! If you walk out that door, don't expect any mercy from me. I paused, but didn't turn around. You haven't shown me any mercy yet, Julian. I stepped out into the driveway. The wind howled through the barren oaks. Inside, the prime rib was still warm, the wine still breathing, but I knew the coldest thing in that house wasn't the winter air. It was the people. The next morning, I was woken by my phone vibrating relentlessly against the nightstand. It was barely 6 a.m. The garbage trucks were just rumbling down the street. Yet my screen was flooded with texts and missed calls. An old industry colleague sent me a link with the text. Clara, what is this? The headline of the Society blog was masterfully manipulative. Wife of dollar, 40M diamond mogul, demands massive payout post. Divorce. Jealousy over a new flame? Reading the article, my blood ran cold. It didn't use my full name, but every detail pointed directly at me. It mentioned a wife who had struggled to provide an heir, who refused to let go post-divorce, and who had received a massive settlement but was now trying to extort the founder on the eve of his new launch. Not a single direct accusation, but the framing painted me as a bitter, money-hungry pariah. Dad walked out of his room holding a mug of tea. Trouble? I handed him the phone. He read it. His face, stoic. Just as they threatened last night. The first strike is always at your reputation. My voice cracked. Dad, they're calling me jealous. They're weaponizing my infertility. I endured that family for a decade, and now they are broadcasting my deepest pain to the public just to protect their rebrand. He set the phone down, his voice a low rumble. When a man cannot win with documents, he fights with gossip. Do not jump into the mud with them. Gossip is like a crowded fish market. The more you push through it, the more you stink. Within an hour, 3 more articles popped up on local business blogs. Disgruntled ex-shareholder furious over rebrand. Another hinted I was suffering a mental breakdown over my inability to conceive. I threw my phone onto the couch. I can't take this. I have to post a statement. I have to tell them the truth. Meredith Hayes walked through the front door, holding a bag of bagels and coffees. She set them down and looked at me calmly. If you speak in the right venue. Right now, your job is to document. She opened her laptop and showed me how to screenshot every article, archive every URL, and save the defamatory comments. We are establishing a record of a coordinated smear campaign, she explained. I read a comment. If a woman can't even give a man kids, she should know when to step aside. I almost laughed. 10 years of building a company from the ground up, erased by an internet troll with a keyboard. Meredith closed the laptop. Clara, we are protecting your assets, but we are also protecting your name. You don't win your name back by getting into a shouting match with anonymous avatars on Instagram. Then how do I win it back? I asked. By dropping the truth in the exact place they can't hide from it. Around noon, just when I thought the day was consumed by digital mudslinging, a Blacktown car pulled up to our house. The woman who stepped out was Beatrice Kensington, a prominent Boston socialite and a major VIP client of Sterling & Stone. She was in her late 40s and owned a massive chain of luxury spas. A few years ago, she commissioned a 5.2-carat diamond ring for her 20th anniversary. I was the one who sourced and approved the stone. Beatrice walked in, looking tense, clutching a small velvet box. "Arthur. Clara, I am so sorry to barge in, but I couldn't discuss this over the phone." We sat in the living room. Dad poured tea. Meredith stayed in the room. Beatrice opened the box. The 5.2-carat diamond sparkled brilliantly. She placed a stack of papers next to it. "Last week, I took the ring to an independent appraiser to update my insurance policy. The appraiser said the specs don't perfectly match the original GIA certificate Sterling & Stone provided. I thought they made a mistake, so I got a second opinion. Same result. My heart plummeted. You bought this ring after I personally approved the stone, correct?" "Yes. I bought it because I trusted you, Clara. You told me this specific stone had a microscopic inclusion near the lower girdle, but the new report shows the inclusion in a completely different location." I picked up the ring. Under normal lighting, it looked flawless. A layman would never know. But I had spent hours with that original stone. I knew its map. I grabbed my dad's loop. As I peered into the heart of the diamond, an icy chill ran down my spine. The inclusion I remembered was gone. Instead, there was a tiny pinpoint defect slightly off-center near the crown. I set the ring down very slowly. "Beatrice, I have to be honest. This is not the stone I approved." All the color drained from her face. "What are you saying? Did you sell me a fake?" "No. It's a real diamond. But it is highly likely it's not the stone matched to your certificate. It might be a lower grade, or the paperwork was manipulated." She stood up, trembling with rage. "Clara, I paid $350,000 for this ring. I told you I bought it because of your eye. If this is a scam, who is accountable?" I stood up and met her gaze. "You have every right to be furious, but I swear to you, the day I signed off on that piece, the stone matched the cert. If someone swapped it, or manipulated the inventory logs after the fact, I will help you tear this place apart to find out who." She stared at me. Finally, she sat back down, exhaling heavily. "I saw the hit pieces about you online this morning. That's why I came straight here. I wanted to look you in the eye before I called my lawyers. I don't want to be a pawn in someone's PR spin." My throat constricted. "Thank you for asking me first." Dad finally spoke. "Meredith, do we have her original receipt, the old certificate, and the new appraisal?" Beatrice nodded. "I brought everything." Meredith took the file, her lawyer persona fully activated. "These are critical, Beatrice, but right now, we can only state there is a discrepancy. We cannot formally accuse them of a bait and switch until a full forensic audit compares this stone to their vault logs." "I understand," I said. "We don't act rash. The truth needs two legs to stand on: hard evidence and legal protocol." Beatrice looked at me. "If Sterling & Stone is pulling a scam, I am suing them into the ground. But if you are kept in the dark too, Clara, I won't let them drag your name through the mud." I squeezed her hand. "Give me a little time. Not to hide, but to find out exactly who signed the release for this stone." Beatrice sighed. "Life is sick, isn't it? You buy a diamond because it's the hardest thing on earth, but you still have to worry about the fragility of human trust." Dad took a sip of his tea. "You can put a diamond under a microscope. You can do the same to a man's character, you just need the right lighting." That afternoon, Meredith opened a new file. Client complaint, Kensington 5.2 CT. Looking at that label, my chest felt incredibly heavy. This was no longer just a corporate divorce. If Beatrice's diamond was swapped, it meant Julian was leveraging the Sterling & Stone reputation and my name to commit fraud. While the smear campaign continued raging online, Inside my father's quiet study, a terrifying truth was beginning to take shape, and I had a gut feeling that Beatrice's ring was just the first fracture. 3 days after Beatrice's visit, my phone rang at 9 p.m. It was an unknown number. I was sitting with Meredith cross-referencing Beatrice's appraisal when I answered. There was silence for a few seconds. Just the sound of passing cars and a hospital intercom in the background. Then, a shaky whisper. Clara. Just my name. And I knew instantly. Chloe? Where are you? Don't call this number back. If you still trust me, meet me at the diner across from Mass General Hospital tomorrow at 7 a.m. I only have 30 minutes. She hung up before I could reply. Meredith looked up. Chloe Harper? I nodded. Meredith capped her pen. I'll go with you tomorrow, but I'll sit in a different booth. If she sees a lawyer right away, she might bolt. The next morning, the diner near Mass General smelled of bleach and burnt coffee. Nurses in scrubs and exhausted families huddled in booths. Chloe arrived wearing a faded parka, her hair in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She scanned the room, then slid into the booth across from me. Did you order? She asked nervously. I got you a black coffee. You should eat something, I said softly. She shook her head. I can't keep anything down. How is your mom? I asked. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. She's been on dialysis for 3 years, Clara. Medical bills are drowning us. Julian knows this. He cornered me. He said if I didn't sign off on the new ledger, I was fired. If I lose my health insurance, my mom dies before I even find a new job. I let the silence hang for a moment. People do the wrong thing for different reasons. Some out of greed. Some out of terror. Chloe, I didn't ask you here to berate you. I just need the truth. She bit her lip, then unzipped her coat pocket and pulled out a brown envelope. She slid it across the Formica table, her hands shaking. Photocopies of the old inventory ledger. I was too scared to steal the original. I hid the original at my mom's house inside a box of her meds. I was afraid Derek would search my desk. I opened the envelope. The familiar spreadsheet grid stared back at me. Date of entry. SKU. Condition. Authorizing signature. In the notes column, clearly printed. The 13 Dawns. Private collection of Clara Sterling. Held on bailment for exhibition. Do not export, transfer, or appraise for corporate collateral without owner's signature. I stared at those words for a long time. For 3 days, I had been crucified online as a greedy ex trying to steal her husband's assets. Yet right here, in the company's own logs, the truth was sitting quietly. I flipped to the specific gem logs. I saw the 8, 6, carat diamond, the blue sapphire, the emerald. But when I got to the rubies, I stopped. A page was missing. The photocopy skipped from page 17 to page 19. The edge of page 17 showed the jagged marks of a torn page. I looked up. Where is page 18? A tear spilled onto Chloe's hand. They ripped it out. That page had the pigeon blood ruby. SKU ASR 7. Internal valuation at $2 million. About 2 weeks before your divorce, Julian told me to pull the file on it to update the insurance. But the withdrawal slip was brought down by Derek. It didn't have your signature on it. My spine turned to ice. Did you release the stone? Chloe shook her head violently. No. When I went to the auxiliary vault, the stone was already gone. Derek told me he had already moved it to the executive suite on Julian's orders. When I asked for the paperwork, he told me it was above my pay grade. And to shut up. Derek Winslow, the same assistant who told me I was non-operational personnel. I gripped the papers. What happened next? Julian called me up to his office. Sienna was there too. They handed me a brand new ledger and told me to sign a backdated entry stating the 13 Dawns were absorbed into corporate assets in 2021 for brand restructuring purposes. Sienna was there? Yes. She told me that if the logs weren't clean, the rebranding launch would fail, the banks would pull our credit lines, and everyone would lose their jobs. She said I shouldn't let one bitter ex-wife ruin the livelihoods of 200 employees. I let out a bitter laugh. The greater good. It's the prettiest phrase people use to force the vulnerable into doing dirty work. Chloe panicked. I know I messed up. I signed it. But I didn't sign everything. When we got to the pages concerning the ruby, I faked a stomachache and ran to the bathroom. While I was in there, I used my phone to take photos of the draft ledger and the torn page. I deleted them from my phone so Derek wouldn't find them, but they're saved on a micro SD card. She pulled a tiny plastic case wrapped in a napkin from her pocket. I don't know if this will save me. But yesterday, I read those articles calling you a thief. If I stay quiet, they're going to pin the missing ruby on you. And that makes me an accomplice. My mom always told me, we might be poor, but don't ever sign your name to ruin an innocent person. I feel so ashamed, Clara. I handed her a napkin. You made a mistake, but you came back. I can't promise you won't get caught in the crossfire, but I promise I will not let them make you the scapegoat. Meredith stood up from her booth and walked over. Chloe flinched, terrified. I grabbed her hand. It's okay. This is Meredith, my lawyer. She is going to help you write a sworn affidavit. You don't exaggerate, you don't guess. You just state exactly what you saw. Meredith sat down, her voice soothing. Chloe, from this moment on, you do not meet with Julian, Derek, or Sienna alone. Do you understand? Keep every text and email regarding the ledger. Do not bring the original ledger back to Boston until we have a federal marshal or a notary with you. Chloe nodded meekly. I asked one last question. Chloe, besides the ruby, were there any other stones with anomalies? She thought for a moment. I'm not 100% sure. But before the PR push, Derek checked out the files for the blue sapphire and a light yellow diamond. When he returned them, the tamper-evident seals on the envelopes were broken. I wrote those two stones down in my notebook. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. Chloe stood up, pulling her hood over her head. Before leaving, she looked back. I'm so sorry, Clara. Apologize later, I said. Right now, stay safe. She disappeared into the crowd of doctors and patients. I sat staring at the cold, black coffee. They say a needle in a haystack will eventually poke you, but sometimes it takes someone in enough pain, enough terror, and enough remorse to finally pull that needle out of the lies. I looked at the tiny SD card in my hand, then at Meredith. Meredith, a $2 million ruby might not even be in the building anymore. Meredith closed her briefcase, her eyes grim. If that's true, Clara, this isn't just about forging logs. This is corporate embezzlement. They are bleeding the assets dry before you can even get a court order. I stood up. The gray clouds hung low over the hospital roof. I finally saw it all clearly. Julian didn't just want to erase my name from Sterling and Stone. He had actively begun pulling the real diamonds out of my mother's legacy, hiding them under the glare of his own spotlight. For the next 3 days, my house was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the suffocating quiet of holding your breath before a tornado hits. I rarely left the house. By day, Meredith and I built the timeline. By night, my dad sat at his desk, polishing his loop, occasionally looking up to ask a hyper-specific question. Do you have the original email in your Outlook server? Yes, Dad. Are all the signatures on the 2016 board minutes notarized? Yes. Which folder has the macro shots of the blue sapphire? The blue binder. Second drawer. His questions were short, but each one felt like he was hammering a nail into the floorboard so I wouldn't fall through. After days of being slaughtered by the tabloids, I realized that sometimes you don't need comfort. You just need someone to help you stack the truth neatly so you can stand on it. On Thursday afternoon, a courier van pulled up. A delivery man brought a long, silver-wrapped garment box tied with a white ribbon. The embossed card read, Clara Sterling. I stared at the elegant font, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Dad walked out of his study. Who sent that? I didn't answer right away. I opened the box. Inside lay a breathtaking silver silk satin evening gown. It was incredibly luxurious, but conservative. Tucked beneath the dress was a VIP pass to the Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds Gala, along with a handwritten note. Julian's handwriting was as flawless and sharp as ever. Clara, I want you there. If you show up, and the press will see we handled this with grace. I picked this silver dress because I know it will catch the stage lights beautifully on you. I kept my hand on the silk. It was freezing cold, like snakeskin. I let out a dry laugh, my throat tightening. Look at this, Dad. He even picked out the costume for the night he plans to erase me. Dad read the note slowly. He didn't yell. He just dropped the card on the table. His voice deadpan. The man who builds the gallows always wants to pick out what the condemned wears. He wants you to look beautiful, but only in a way that benefits him. I stared at the silver dress. If I wore it and stood next to Julian while the cameras flashed, the world would think we had an amicable divorce. They would think I took my payout, I was happy, and I was there to bless his new venture. My silence would become the official rubber stamp on his lies. I was about to throw the dress back into the box when my phone rang. Sienna Caldwell. I answered and put it on speaker. Her voice was like honey stirred into warm water. Clara! It's Sienna. I was just calling to see if you received the dress Julian sent, I replied coldly. I got it. Oh, wonderful. I thought that silhouette would look so elegant on you, sophisticated, not too flashy. I know the press is going to be swarming the gala, so I figured your image needed to be tightly curated. Dad scoffed quietly, sipping his tea as if listening to a terrible radio play. I asked, Sienna, are you calling to be my personal stylist, or to make sure I agree to be your PR prop? There was a half-second pause on the line. That's a bit harsh, Clara. I just want everything to look beautiful for everyone. Everyone? You mean you, Julian? Or the fairy tale you're writing for Thorne Luxury? Sienna's voice maintained its softness, but the thorns came out. Clara, I think at your age, the best look is a dignified one. If you show up looking poised and supportive, society will respect you. But if you make a scene, well, the media loves a bitter ex-wife narrative. I laughed softly. Don't worry, Sienna. I'll be incredibly poised. But I won't be wearing a dress sent to cover up the stains on your narrative. She went dead silent. Finally, she whispered, So, you're still coming? I'll be there. I hope you remember the meaning of the word civilized. Civilized doesn't mean staying silent while someone robs you blind, Sienna. Since you're in PR, I figured you'd understand the importance of semantics. I hung up. The house was quiet for a second before Dad let out a real chuckle. Not bad. A little dramatic, but you landed the punch. I exhaled a shaky breath. I'm still shaking, Dad. Shaking means you know you're walking into a minefield. Don't be afraid of the shakes. Just be afraid of signing the wrong paper or saying the wrong thing when you're scared. That evening, Meredith arrived. She placed a checklist on the table. Copies of the bailment contract, probate records, the LLC capitalization records, Julian's emails, the macro photos of the gems, Beatrice Kensington's appraisal file, Chloe's preliminary affidavit. At the gala, we do not start a riot, Meredith instructed. If they just give a generic speech, we observe. But the second they publicly declare the 13 Dons as Thorne corporate assets, we challenge it. Arthur asks the question. You don't need to jump in immediately. I nodded. Dad opened his old leather case and pulled out the jeweler's loop my mother used to use. He polished it meticulously and set it next to the files. Bring this. I looked at him. You think they'd dare display fake stones? I'm not guessing, he replied. I'm just preparing for the worst. In this business, you can trust people with your heart, but you verify with a halogen lamp. Right then, Dad's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered. Wallace? I sat up straight. It was Uncle Wallace Bennett, the minority shareholder and insurance appraiser. His gruff voice echoed through the speaker. Arthur, I just got a VIP invite to Julian's gala. He invited me as an independent valuation advisor. Strange, isn't it? Does the kid think I have amnesia regarding the original paperwork? Dad looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He wants to use your reputation as a shield. Uncle Wallace scoffed. Then I'm going. If a man invites me to shine a light on his rocks, it'd be rude not to show up. See you there. I felt goosebumps erupt on my arms. Julian was so arrogant that he invited the very man capable of identifying the discrepancies in the collection. Julian truly believed the stage lights would blind everyone to his theft. He didn't realize that a bright enough light exposes every hidden fracture. The night before the gala, I stood in front of my closet for a long time. The silver dress sat in its box cold, beautiful, and complicit. Finally, I pulled out a simple, tailored black crepe dress. No sequins, no plunging neckline, no diamond necklaces to make me look like an accessory to Julian's success. I wasn't going to sparkle. I was going to stand my ground. Dad leaned against the doorframe. Decided? I nodded. Yes, I'm not wearing his silver. Dad smiled faintly. Wear whatever you want, kid. As long as your conscience is clean. I closed the silver box and pushed it to the back of the closet. Outside, the street lamps flickered on. The world kept turning, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. I looked at the VIP pass on my dresser. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room filled with red carpets, white roses, and crystal chandeliers. Julian thought he was inviting his defeated ex-wife to witness his coronation. He forgot one crucial rule. A trap lined with velvet is still a trap, and sometimes it snaps shut on the person who set it. Saturday morning, I woke up before my alarm. A thin layer of Boston fog clung to the windows. I stood in front of the mirror, wearing the black dress I had picked out. My hair was pulled back into a severe, low chignon. Minimal makeup, nothing that screamed for attention. Dad was waiting downstairs. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, his hand resting on his battered leather briefcase. Inside were the copies of my mother's probate, the bailment contract, the macro photos, the loop, and Meredith's highlighted legal files. He looked older to me suddenly, but his eyes possessed a sharp clarity, the look of a man who had spent his life scrutinizing diamonds and had never bowed to human greed. He offered me a bowl of oatmeal. Eat something. I shook my head. I can't stomach it. He pushed the bowl closer. Eat 3 bites. Going into a crowded room on an empty stomach makes the nerves worse. I forced down a few spoonfuls. It was bland, but warm. I think I'll remember that bowl of oatmeal longer than any of the champagne served later that night. The Harbor Hotel in the Seaport District was buzzing when our car pulled up. A literal red carpet stretched from the curb, flanked by white floral arrangements, paparazzi flashbulbs, and a massive step-and-repeat banner. Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds. The $40 million empire. Dad got out first and offered his arm. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the carpet. My heels clicked against the pavement, but I felt like I was walking on broken glass. Photographers noticed me immediately. Clara! Clara Sterling! Any comment on attending your ex-husband's launch party? I stopped and gave a polite, measured smile. I'm here because I was invited. That was it. Not a word more. Meredith had warned me. Don't give them a single soundbite they can edit out of context. The grand ballroom was on the top floor, overlooking the dark, glittering water of the harbor. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain. Tables were draped in white linen, surrounded by silver Chiavari chairs and towering orchids. A string quartet played softly. It was so opulent, it was easy to forget that the foundation of this room was built on a lie. The guest list was heavier than I anticipated. Banking executives, insurance underwriters, society elites, and clients who had originally bought from us because they trusted me. Uncle Wallace Bennett was already seated in the second row. He gave my dad a subtle nod as we walked in. Julian was holding court near the media pit. He wore a pristine white tuxedo jacket, his hair slicked, flashing a brilliant smile. Beside him stood Sienna Caldwell in a striking crimson gown, holding a flute of champagne. Eleanor Thorne sat at the head VIP table in a deep purple velvet gown, dripping in pearls, looking utterly triumphant. Seeing me, Julian approached quickly. Before the cameras, he opened his arms for a performative embrace. I took a half step back and extended my hand instead. He faltered, then shook it. "Thank you for coming, Clara. I knew you'd be the bigger person." I smiled politely. "There are some nights that only happen once in a lifetime, Julian. I wouldn't miss it." His smile stiffened. Sienna instantly swooped in. "Clara, you look lovely, but... Oh, you didn't wear the dress Julian sent? I thought silver would look so much better under the stage lights." I glanced at her crimson dress. "I prefer dressing myself, Sienna, especially on nights where I need to think clearly." Sienna's smile thinned, and she didn't press further. Julian escorted us to the VIP table. My place card read, "Clara Sterling, founder of Sterling & Stone." I stared at it. On this tiny piece of cardboard, I was a founder. But everywhere else, the banners, the screens, the press kits, I had been surgically removed. I saw Beatrice Kensington sitting at the adjacent table. She caught my eye. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a fierce solidarity. I gave her a tiny nod, not to say thank you, but to remind myself that someone in this room cared about the truth. The program began at 7 p.m. The lights dimmed. The MC took the stage, hyping up the journey from a tiny storefront to a $40 million enterprise. The massive LED screen flashed to a video montage. I braced myself, thinking I might see an old sketch, or my mother's face. Instead, the video cut straight to Julian shaking hands, Julian cutting a ribbon in Chicago, Julian giving a speech in Beverly Hills. The voiceover boomed. Under the visionary leadership of CEO Julian Thorne, Thorne Luxury Estate Diamonds inherits the pinnacle of American gemstone heritage, elevating a family legacy to the global stage. Family legacy. My hands balled into fists under the tablecloth. My mother was buried in the ground, and here was her life's work being claimed by a narrator with a silky voice. Next came the CAD renderings of the engagement rings I had designed. The text on the screen read, "Signature creations by Julian Thorne and the Thorne design team." Julian took the stage to thunderous applause. He held the microphone, his voice dripping with charisma. "Ladies and gentlemen, every great journey begins with trust. Thorne Luxury wasn't built just to sell diamonds. We are here to tell a story of resilience, heritage, and the American dream." He looked incredibly handsome under the spotlight. To a stranger, he was a titan. To me, he was a man wearing a tailored suit made of stolen threads. Julian continued, "Tonight, we have the ultimate privilege of unveiling the cornerstone of our brand, the Thorne Heritage Collection. These are the ultra-rare gemstones that have been the bedrock of our company since day one." The room erupted in applause. Two handlers rolled a display case draped in black velvet to the center of the stage. I stopped breathing. Dad sat perfectly still, but his hand moved to the latch of his briefcase. Eleanor Thorne shot me a smug sidelong glance. Sienna stood near the media pit, signaling the cameramen to push in tight on the vault. Julian placed his hand on the velvet cloth, and the crown jewel of this journey, the 8.6-carat flawless diamond that is the very soul of Thorne Luxury. He pulled the cloth away. The spotlights hit the glass. The white oval diamond sat on a black velvet bust, shooting blinding refractions across the room. The crowd gasped. Camera shutters fired like machine guns. I stared at the diamond. From 30 feet away, I couldn't tell, but a sickening feeling washed over me. It felt like looking at a stranger wearing my best friend's face. Julian smiled, bathing in the glory. He raised a hand, asking the VIPs to stand for the official ribbon cutting. At that exact moment, Arthur Sterling stood up. The scraping of his chair against the floor wasn't loud, but in that silent, reverent room it echoed. A few heads turned. Julian looked down, his smile faltering slightly. After 11 years of marriage, I knew exactly what Julian looked like when he was furious but forced to smile. Julian rested his hand on the glass case, his tone dripping with forced politeness. "Arthur, did you have a question? I'm so honored my former father-in-law could join us tonight." Dad didn't walk to the stage. He stood by his chair, holding a secondary microphone a waiter had accidentally left on a nearby tray. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried to the back of the room. "Julian, before you cut that ribbon, I have a question regarding the 8.6-carat diamond in that case. Who currently owns it?" The ballroom went deathly quiet. Sienna Caldwell froze by the press pit, her smile turning into a rictus grin. Eleanor Thorne's face darkened with rage. Julian let out a charming chuckle. "Arthur, this is the flagship stone of Thorne Luxury. It is part of the heritage collection I just introduced. It is the foundational asset of this brand." Dad nodded. "I asked who owns it. I didn't ask what it was a symbol of." That single sentence acted like a tripwire. The banking executives at the front tables instantly exchanged sharp looks. At a multi-million-dollar corporate launch, the word ownership is never casual. Julian's eyes narrowed. "Arthur, this is a family matter. Today is a celebration. We can discuss technicalities privately." Dad stared him down. "If you had kept it in your living room, it would be a family matter. But you are standing in front of your creditors, your insurance underwriters, the press, and your VIP clients, claiming this stone as the corporate asset of a new LLC. This is no longer a private dinner conversation." Murmurs broke out. The MC tried to step in, looking at Julian for a cue, but Uncle Wallace Bennett stood up from the second row. "Let Arthur finish," Wallace barked. "I was invited here as an independent valuation advisor. The legal provenance of a displayed asset is a highly relevant question." Julian's smile vanished. Sienna frantically signaled the AV tech, and the LED screen abruptly switched to a static Thorne logo. But every eye in the room was fixed on my father. Dad popped the latch on his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Julian, in 2017, Sterling and Stone LLC signed a bailment and exhibition agreement regarding the 13 Dawns collection. The legal owner is my daughter, Clara Sterling. The contract bears your signature, Clara's signature, the corporate seal, and a notary stamp." Dad read directly from the paper. It states clearly, "The company is strictly prohibited from selling, pledging, transferring, incorporating into corporate assets, or leveraging as collateral without the direct, physical signature of Clara Sterling." He handed a copy to a waiter. "Please hand this to Mr. Thorne." Derek Winslow rushed forward to intercept it, but Dad barked. "The question was for Julian. The signature on the contract is Julian's." Derek froze. Julian was forced to take the document. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt an exhausting ache. Julian flipped through the pages, his jaw clenched. "Arthur, this is an old contract with Sterling and Stone. Thorne Luxury is the acquiring successor. Clara agreed to let the collection support the brand." I stood up. A waiter handed me a microphone. My voice was calmer than I thought possible. "I agreed to exhibit them at Sterling and Stone for a fixed term. I have never signed a transfer of deed, a deed of gift, or authorized you to roll my mother's private collection into the corporate assets of Thorne Luxury." Julian gripped the podium, his knuckles turning white. "Clara, did you really come here tonight just to ruin this? I came here because you chose tonight to publicly declare my property as your own, I replied. A senior VP from their lead underwriting bank stood up. Excuse me. Mr. Thorne, the financial prospectus we received explicitly listed the Thorne Heritage Collection as a corporate asset, and its appraised value was used to secure your current lines of credit. What is the legal basis for transferring these assets to your new LLC? The tension in the room was suffocating. Julian answered rapidly. The valuation in the prospectus was referencing brand equity, not physical collateral. It was a projection. Perhaps the legal team used vague terminology. Uncle Wallace fired back instantly. Using vague terminology in a bank prospectus regarding millions of dollars in loose diamonds is called bank fraud. Julian, a GIA certificate tells you the grade of the stone. It doesn't tell you who owns it. Ownership requires a bill of sale, probate records, or a transfer contract. A VIP client near the front muttered loudly, "So does Thorne Luxury even own the diamond in that box?" Dad spoke before Julian could spin it. According to the legal documents in my hand, it belongs to my daughter's private trust. The old LLC was merely a Bailey. The new LLC cannot claim ownership without a signed transfer. Eleanor Thorne couldn't hold back anymore. She shot up from her chair, knocking her wineglass over. "Arthur Sterling, you are out of line! Your daughter divorced my son, and now you're here sabotaging his company. We treated her like family for 10 years, and this is how she repays us? Over some old rocks?" Dad looked at her, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "If you treated her like family, Eleanor, her name wouldn't have been scrubbed from the company history. And those old rocks are my late wife's inheritance to her daughter. It isn't a parting gift in a divorce settlement. You don't get to keep it just because you feel entitled." Sienna rushed over, grabbing Eleanor's arm to pull her back. Julian lowered his voice, but the mic picked it up. "Mom, sit down." Julian turned to my dad. "Arthur, I respect you, but you are actively damaging the valuation of this enterprise. If there is a civil dispute, we handle it with lawyers." Meredith Hayes stood up from the back of the room, pulling a business card from her blazer. "I am Meredith Hayes, legal counsel for Clara Sterling. We are here because Mr. Thorne has publicly utilized my client's assets and fabricated their origin story in a manner that constitutes fraud. We are not causing a scene. We are demanding clarification before fraudulent information is disseminated to investors and the press." The lead insurance underwriter stepped toward the stage. "Mr. Thorne, given that there is an active legal dispute regarding the title of the exhibited asset, I must insist we halt the ribbon cutting. My firm requires an immediate condition report to be drafted and signed by all parties to maintain the chain of custody." Julian glared at him. "You are overreacting. This is a private corporate event." Uncle Wallace crossed his arms. "When you invite banks, insurers, and the press to witness the unveiling of an asset, you assume liability for the claims you make." "Julian." Sienna panicked, grabbing a mic. "Let's pivot to the dinner service. The legal paperwork can be sorted out tomorrow. Let's not let a paperwork error ruin a beautiful evening of celebration." I looked at her. "Clients don't come here to watch arguments, Sienna, but they certainly don't come here to applaud a lie." Eleanor lunged forward, pointing at me. "Shut up! You divorced him, and now you're clinging to him. You're just a bitter, barren woman who wants to destroy him because you have nothing else." Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. It hurt, but this time, I didn't shrink. I spoke softly into the mic. "Eleanor, my ability to have a child has no bearing on the legal title of a diamond." Eleanor's face turned purple. Julian hissed. "Mom?" I said enough. The insurance rep wasn't backing down. "Mr. Thorne, open the case. We need to conduct a visual verification of the keystones against the macro photography in the original file." Derek Winslow stepped in front of the vault. "Absolutely not. Only our certified technicians are permitted to handle the inventory." Uncle Wallace scoffed. "Then have your technician open it. No one is touching the stones without gloves. but we are looking at them. Trapped under the gaze of bankers and media, Julian had no choice. He signaled a technician. The young man was shaking so badly he typed the code wrong twice. Finally, the glass vault clicked open. It was a soft sound, but it felt like a mask cracking in half. The 8.6-carat diamond sat in its tray. Uncle Wallace and the insurance rep leaned in, refusing to touch it until a log was drafted. Dad pulled the original macro photos from his briefcase. You can't verify the white diamond without a scope. But I want to see the blue sapphire. My heart plummeted into my stomach. The blue sapphire was my mother's favorite. She used to say, because it has a little cloud inside it. Life is like that no matter how bright, there's always a cloud. The technician brought out the velvet tray holding the sapphire. I put on a pair of white cotton gloves and took the loupe from my father. My hands were shaking. Dad set the macro photo on the table. In the file, the sapphire had a distinct crescent-shaped cloud inclusion in its lower quadrant. It was nature's fingerprint. I leaned over and put the loupe to my eye. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. There was no cloud. Instead, near the right girdle, there was a microscopic pinpoint defect completely off-center. The stone was beautiful. It was blue, but it was not the stone my mother had held in her hands. I stood up. My throat was completely parched. This stone does not match the original macro photography. The ballroom went completely still. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. Julian rushed down from the stage. Don't make baseless accusations, Clara. You looked at it for 3 seconds. I set the loupe down. I am not officially concluding what stone this is, or who swapped it. I am stating, as a gemologist looking at the original intake photos, that the sapphire in this tray is not the sapphire from the 13 Dawns collection. Uncle Wallace took the loupe, inspected the stone, and looked at the photo. I concur. There is a visual discrepancy. We need an independent lab appraisal, the certificates, and the vault logs. The banking VP immediately pulled out his phone and called his risk management team. The insurance rep demanded a notary be called to the hotel instantly. A VIP client whispered loudly, "My God, if the exhibition stones are fake, what are they selling to us?" That sentence sliced across Julian's face like a razor blade. Sienna screamed at the AV crew, "Cut the cameras! Turn them off!" But the guests already had their iPhones out. Trying to stop the recording was like trying to drain the Atlantic Ocean with a bucket. Julian looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. "Clara, you're trying to destroy me, aren't you?" "No," I replied. "I just want to know where the real diamond is." Eleanor charged at me. "You set this up. You swapped it before you left, and now you're framing my son." "It wasn't Clara." A trembling female voice echoed from the side entrance. Everyone turned. Standing by the ballroom doors was Chloe Harper, clutching her canvas tote bag. Her face was chalk white. She must have been standing outside the doors long enough that she couldn't stay silent anymore. Chloe walked into the room. The 13 Dawns collection was logged as bailment property belonging to Clara Sterling. The protocol was that it could not be exported, transferred, or claimed as corporate assets without her signature. Derek Winslow went pale. "Chloe, do you have any idea what you're saying?" Chloe looked up, tears streaming down her face, but her voice held steady. "I know that Derek and Julian forced me to sign a new, backdated ledger moving the assets to corporate ownership in 2021. Sienna Caldwell was in the room. "I have photocopies of the old ledger. I have photographs of the forged pages, and I have text messages from Derek telling me to get my story straight." Sienna stumbled backward. The champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor, the liquid seeping into the red carpet like thin blood. Julian roared, "Shut your mouth! Who is paying you to come in here and lie?" Chloe flinched, but she didn't retreat. "I am paid by this company, but I am not paid to commit fraud." Her words sent a shockwave through the room. A young girl, terrified of losing her mother's health insurance, had just delivered the most devastating blow of the night. Meredith stepped in front of Chloe. As of this moment, we demand that all parties cease witness intimidation. We will be taking this to the appropriate federal authorities. The insurance rep announced that all asset movement was frozen. A condition report was drafted right on the cocktail tables amidst the chaos. They didn't put police tape around the room, but they demanded hotel security lock down the vault until authorities arrived. The red ribbon remained uncut. The golden scissors sat untouched on the silver tray. No one was talking about the launch anymore. Julian Thorne, the man who just 20 minutes ago was preaching about legacy and ambition in a white tuxedo, now stood center stage, pale and sweating profusely under the crystal chandeliers. There was no ribbon-cutting photo that night. There was only a locked glass case, a sapphire missing its cloud, and the ghostly pale face of a man standing amidst a crowd that had originally gathered to worship him. After the gala imploded, I thought Julian would go quiet and try to salvage his legal defense. But when an arrogant man is backed into a corner, his first instinct isn't to repent. It's to find a human shield to throw in front of the blade. The next morning, the internet exploded with a much darker story. While the gala was in chaos, the pigeon blood ruby valued at $2 million had supposedly vanished from the Thorne luxury vaults. Anonymous sources in the articles planted the idea that the only person with the motive to steal it was the disgruntled ex-wife who claimed she owned it. I read the articles and actually laughed. Dad set down his tea. He's trying to bury you with the stone he stole weeks ago. You think he planned this? I asked. Dad replied softly. A man who plans to steal the pie always keeps a napkin ready to wipe his mouth. Less than an hour later, Julian called me. Clara, the ruby is gone. If you have it, return it right now, and I will tell the police you acted out of temporary insanity. I put him on speakerphone. Are you talking about SKU ASR7? He paused. Don't play dumb. You're the only one with a motive, I replied. Go ahead and file the police report, Julian, but make sure you tell the detectives exactly what day it was last logged in the vault. Who pulled the file, who held the keys, and who signed the release. The line went dead silent. Then he snarled, If you drag me down, you're coming with me. I hung up. Some phone calls are just made to project fear, not to solve a problem. Later that afternoon, Meredith filed an injunction demanding the preservation of all assets, a freeze on the inventory logs, and a digital trace of all vault access. We submitted Chloe's photocopies, the SD card photos, the bailment contract, and my mother's probate list. 3 days later, the first real crack appeared in the insurance logs. The $2 million ruby had not disappeared the night of the gala. It had been checked out for reappraisal almost 2 weeks before I signed the divorce papers. The internal withdrawal slip was submitted by Derek Winslow, countersigned by the CEO's office. There was a signature under owner consent on the scanned PDF, but when placed next to my actual signature from the probate files, the slant and pressure were blatantly forged. Meredith looked at it. We need a handwriting expert, but this is an obvious forgery. Dad stared at the scan. This girl has been signing her name for 30 years. I know her handwriting. This isn't Clara's hand. The second piece of evidence came from the service elevator security cameras in the building's basement. On the night the ruby was checked out, Derek Winslow was seen carrying a secure lockbox to a waiting SUV. Walking right next to him was Sienna Caldwell, but the final nail in the coffin came from a forensic trace of corporate debt. An escrow receipt from a boutique shadow lending firm showed that the ruby had been posted as physical collateral for a short-term bridge loan granted to Caldwell Media PR. Sienna wasn't the listed CEO, but the emails, the wire transfers, and the consulting fees all traced directly back to her firm. In a recovered email thread, Sienna wrote to Julian, If we can just get through the gala launch, I can rotate the cash flow and pull the stone out of escrow. Clara's keycard is deactivated. She won't be able to check the vault. Reading that sentence, my chest felt hollow. They didn't just lock me out to hurt my pride. They locked me out so I wouldn't walk in and catch them fencing my mother's diamonds to fund their own PR campaign. From April to July 2025, my life was an endless loop of depositions, handwriting analysts, gemological audits, matching inclusions, interviewing VIP clients who needed their stones verified. There were nights I came home so exhausted I collapsed on the couch in my coat. But every time I wanted to give up, I looked at the picture of my mother. The final forensic report concluded that the 13 Dons were my exclusive, private property. Internal documents had been forged. 3 stones had been swapped, moved, or used as unauthorized collateral, including the $2 million ruby. The $40 million valuation of Thorn Luxury was deemed fundamentally fraudulent, built on false asset declarations and illegal capitalization. Sterling and Stone LLC held an emergency shareholder meeting. Between myself, my father, and Uncle Wallace, we had the majority vote to suspend Julian's executive powers and hand the books over to independent federal auditors. The banks froze Thorn Luxury's credit lines. The insurance companies voided their policies due to title fraud. VIP clients launched a massive class action suit against Julian. Julian went from standing in the spotlight to dodging paparazzi outside federal court. Sienna Caldwell vanished from the corporate world, only to have her leaked emails expose her role in the smear campaign and the fraudulent loan. She wanted to write my narrative. Instead, her own emails wrote her ending. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor Thorne showed up at my dad's house. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen, her hands gripping an old leather purse. Clara, she called me. It was the name of a person she had personally thrown out into the snow. I invited her in and poured her a cup of tea. Having manners doesn't mean you forget the pain. She broke down crying. Please, Clara. Julian was wrong, but he's my son. For the sake of the 11 years you spent in our family, don't push for maximum sentencing. Don't destroy him. I looked at her. The woman who once told me I was useless because I couldn't give her a grandchild was now begging for mercy in the name of family. I spoke slowly. Eleanor, I am not seeking revenge. I am simply putting things back where they belong. The reputation goes back to the person who earned it. The assets go back to the owner. And the consequences go back to the person who committed the crime. She bowed her head, sobbing into her hands. For the first time, she had absolutely nothing cruel left to say. In late 2025, I opened a small private gallery in Beacon Hill called The Dons. There was no red carpet, no paparazzi, no white roses, and no one giving speeches about an empire. There were just 13 glass cases. Each case held a stone, its true origin, and the story my mother had written for it. Dad stood next to me, holding his old loupe. Beatrice Kensington, Chloe Harper, Uncle Wallace, and Meredith Hayes were all there. Chloe had brought her mother in a wheelchair. The frail woman held my hand. Thank you for giving my daughter the courage to tell the truth. I smiled, my eyes stinging, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I had lost a marriage. I had wasted a decade trusting the wrong man. But I got my name back. I got my mother's legacy back. And most importantly, I got back the right to stand tall without needing anyone's permission. Dear listeners, sometimes in life the scariest thing isn't walking away with nothing. The scariest thing is signing a piece of paper that erases who you are. Loyalty and love are precious, but they can never be used as an excuse to let someone steal your work, your property, or your dignity. If my story resonated with you, leave a comment, subscribe to podcast, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that as long as you hold on to the truth, the road never truly ends. I closed the gallery opening by placing my hand on the glass case holding the pigeon blood ruby, finally retrieved from the shadow lenders. The deep red fire inside the stone glowed warm and steady. And this time, no one would ever dare call it by another name.